What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. The fight gloves are on. UFC 153 this weekend, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Giving you a little preview of my Halloween costume and wearing this Psycho mask in honor of the American Psycho, Stephan Bonnar, stepping up to face the greatest of all time, Anderson Silva, in the main event fight of the evening. Let's get to the fight picks. Okay, so now that I gave you a little preview of something other than my big ugly mug, let's get to these fight picks. We're going to start on the prelim card. In the lightweight division, we've got Cristiano Marcelo taking on, I believe his first name is pronounced Heza, but it might be Reza, but I'm going to say Heza anyway. Heza Madadi. Cristiano Marcelo, 12-4 on his pro career, losing his octagon debut, being knocked out by Sam Sicilia, who is also on this card. Marcelo, 11 of his 12 pro wins have been finishes. Cristiano Marcelo, notable as being the one of the head BJJ trainers at the Shoot Box camp. So, I mean, obviously very accomplished in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a 4th degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under both a combination of Hickson and Royler Gracie. So there's no better background for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than has Cristiano Marcelo. His opponent, Heza Madadi, 12-2 on his pro career, won his octagon debut by submitting Yoslandi Izquierdo. 9 of his 12 pro wins have been finishes. When the fight goes the distance to decisions, he is 3-2. Solid wrestling base, very solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but in 6 years, the guy's only had 2 knockouts. So he's got very little knockout power in his hands, not saying he's not a good striker, but simply saying that the knockout power in his hands, not really there. I think this fight's going to hit the ground early. I think it's going to hit the ground often, and once this fight hits the ground, it's Cristiano Marcelo's fight to lose. I don't think he's going to lose it. Cristiano Marcelo, submission, first round. Moving up to the middleweights, we have the returning Luis Kane taking on Chris Camozzi. Luis Kane, 12-4-1 on his pro career, an even record of 4-4 inside the octagon. Was TKO'd in his last fight by Stanislav Nedkov. Luis Kane is coming off of an injury. Y'all know I don't really like to bet with people who are coming off injuries, even minor ones. 10 of his 12 pro wins have come by way of knockout. However, in his last 3 losses, he has been TKO'd in all 3 of them. Chris Camozzi, 17-5 on his pro career. A very solid record, actually, of 5-2 inside the octagon. Currently riding a 2-win streak over Nick Catone and Dustin Jacoby. As far as his win record goes, very balanced. He can knock people out. He's got 5 knockouts. He can submit people. He's got 6 submissions. And he can go the distance and win fights with 6 decision wins. However, Camozzi has been submitted in 3 of his 5 losses. I really don't think Camozzi needs to worry about getting submitted in this fight. As we said, 10 of Kane's 12 pro wins have come by way of knockout. Like I said, I never like to go with people coming off an injury. I'm going to stick with my guns here on Chris Camozzi. Going to predict Chris Camozzi to defeat Luis Kane by unanimous judges' decision. In the welterweight division, we have Sergio Moraes, I believe is how you pronounce his name, at least that's how I'm going to pronounce it, taking on Rene Forte. Sergio Moraes, 6-2 in his pro career, lost his octagon debut to Cesar Ferreira. 5 of his 6 professional wins have come by way of submission. He is a 4-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, and this is actually his debut fight at 170. Rene Forte, 7-1 on his pro career, as I mentioned, making his octagon debut. He TKO'd Renan Santos in Amazon Fights in his last outing. He has won all 3 of his fights that have gone to decisions. He is a Team Nogueira fighter, so you know he's getting an excellent training regimen when the fight hits the ground. Just because he's getting an excellent training regimen when the fight hits the ground does not mean he can hang with a 4-time Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion. I am going to take Sergio Moraes. I'm going to take Sergio Moraes by submission in the 2nd round. I think he finishes this fight. Moving down to the featherweights, we have Diego Brandao taking on Joey Gambino. Brandao, 14-8 on his pro career, an even record of 1-1 in the UFC. Brandao was decisioned by Darren Elkins in his last fight in what was a very close fight that I had Brandao winning. Brandao, of course, won Season 14 of The Ultimate Fighter by defeating Dennis Bermudez, which is a high-level, high-caliber opponent. 8 of Brandao's 14 wins have come by way of knockout. However, he has been knocked out in 4 of his 8 professional losses. Joey Gambino, very impressive 9-1 on his pro career. 0-1 in the UFC, being submitted in his last fight by Stephen Seiler in an outing that I didn't think was all that impressive. That, however, snapped, obviously, Gambino's 9-fight win streak prior to that. 8 of his 9 pro wins have been finishes. He's knocked out 3 opponents. He's submitted 5 opponents. He is a well-rounded fighter, that being Joey Gambino. I look at Brandao's track record. I think Brandao has fought and beaten higher caliber opponents. I like Brandao's overall skill set better than I like Gambino's. I like how he looked in his previous fight. Diego Brandao all day by TKO in the 2nd round. Moving up to the lightweights, we have Gleison Tibau taking on Francisco Trinaldo. Gleison Tibau, 25-8 on his pro career, an impressive record of 10-6 inside the octagon. Tibau lost a decision to Khabib Nurmagomedov in his last fight, a fight that I had predicted that Tibau was going to win, and I did not think Tibau looked very impressive at all in that fight. Nurmagomedov basically bullied him around. That loss to Nurmagomedov snapped a 3-fight win streak. He's a southpaw wrestler, trains with American Top Team. He's got 11 decisions on his career, so 11 of those 25 wins by way of decision. He's got great training partners with ATT. He's got a very well-rounded game. He can finish opponents, and he can take opponents the distance. I'm really, really high on Gleison Tibau. Francisco Trinaldo, 11-1 on his pro career, winning his octagon debut, currently riding a 5-fight win streak, which includes, of course, his UFC debut where he TKO'd Delson Heleno. This is a move back to lightweight for Trinaldo. Actually, his last fight was at middleweight. So this is a guy that is obviously going to be a very, very big lightweight if his last fight was at middleweight, which is, of course, 30 pounds heavier. Trinaldo didn't look the greatest in the fight against Heleno, but you got to imagine, like, he's carrying a lot more natural weight. This is a lot closer to his natural weight class at lightweight, so he's carrying a lot of extra weight in that fight. Trinaldo, obviously, like I said, his last fight was at middleweight, 30 extra pounds. That's a big weight cut from where he was in his previous fight. And I don't care what anybody says, your body has muscle memory like that. If that's what you fought at last time, that's sort of what your body's going to naturally assume that you're going to fight at this time. You got to wonder how that weight cut is going to affect Trinaldo's gas tank. You really do. And especially against a guy like Gleison Tibau, who can be smothering, who can be very, very dominant. You got to wonder, if Tibau takes this fight into deep waters, is Trinaldo going to have an answer? I'm expecting no. I'm sticking with Gleison Tibau. I was high on him. I'm going to stay high on him. Gleison Tibau by unanimous judges' decision over Francisco Trinaldo. And the last fight on the prelim cards, this is back at the featherweight division. We have Ronnie Mariano Bezerra taking on the aforementioned Sam Sicilia. Ronnie Mariano Bezerra, 11-3 on his pro career, winning his octagon debut, currently riding a 6-fight win streak, including that UFC debut, which was a decision victory over Pepe. Of course, Bezerra won Tough Brazil, which for all 6 of you that watched it, that's great. And 10 of his 11 pro wins have been finishes. He's got 3 knockouts, 7 submissions. So leans a little bit more towards the grappling side of things, but is a well-rounded fighter. Sam Sicilia, 11-1 on his pro career. So 2 fewer fights, but the exact same number of wins. Also won his octagon debut, and he is riding a 7-fight win streak, which includes that knockout victory over Cristiano Marcelo, aforementioned, in his UFC debut. Cecilia is primarily a boxer. Primarily an orthodox boxer, so right-handed, but he does have a very good overall skill set, as I mentioned. He's got 4 submissions in those 11 wins, so he is a well-rounded fighter. This is the story of 2 guys who are both very well-rounded. My question about this fight is going to be when the fight hits the ground, because I think Becerra very clearly has a better ground game than Cecilia does. So if this fight hits the ground, which I expect it's going to, it kind of goes more into Becerra's domain. I'm expecting it's going to hit the ground. I'm expecting Becerra's going to have the advantage, and I'm expecting Becerra to take this fight. I'm actually going to give him this fight by way of knockout or technical knockout, more than likely technical knockout, inside the third round. Moving to the main card now, we have at the welterweight division, Demian Maia taking on Rick the Horror Story. Maia is 16-4 on his pro career, 10-4 in the UFC, a wealth of octagon experience for Demian Maia. He TKO'd Stun Gun Kim in his last fight, which was his welterweight debut. That was, of course, a bit of a freak injury on Kim's part. Maia scored a takedown, and Kim, I believe, was having had a muscle spasm, and that's what caused the TKO. Some of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in mixed martial arts. His advantages here when it comes to the grappling really cannot be understated. And Rick Story is no slouch when it comes to grappling either. Story, of course, more of a wrestler than he is a jiu-jitsu grappler, but at the same time, Story does have good grappling, but Maia's grappling is just on another level. However, before that fight with Stun Gun, which technically counts as a technical knockout, Maia had no finishes since 2009. So, I mean, he's a fighter that, I mean, we all know that, remember that stinker that he had against Anderson Silva, and he's a fighter that, for a stretch there, was not overly exciting, because you kind of knew what was coming from him, right? So it was kind of hard to get hyped up for a Demian Maia fight. That being said, Maia can be a finisher, and his grappling is good enough that he can finish people, for sure. Rick Story, 14-5 in his pro career, 7-3 in the UFC, a very respectable record. Decisioned Brock Jardine in his last fight, and that snapped a 2-loss streak for the Horror Story. 8 of his 14 pro wins have come by way of decision. A phrase that I like to use, everyone's heard the phrase sort of wrestle boxer. I like to use the phrase wrestle kickboxer with Story. So wrestle kickboxer, 13 of his 19 professional fights have gone the way of gone to a decision. So again, Story 8-5 when the fights go the distance. I don't see any way that this fight doesn't go the distance unless Maia snaps on some, I won't say miracle, but some sort of flash triangle or armbar or something that Story's not ready for. I imagine this fight's going to go to decision. I'm with Demian Maia all the way in this fight. Demian Maia, unanimous judges' decision over Rick Story. Moving up to the light heavyweights, we have the rematch between Wagner Prado and Phil Davis. Prado 8-0-1 on his pro career, 0-0-1 in the UFC. Phil Davis 9-1-1 on his pro career, 5-1-1 in the UFC. Of course, both of these guys' previous fight was that no contest, the accidental eye poke by Phil Davis. Everybody sort of remembers that image of Wagner Prado just like begging the ref and the doctors and everything not to stop the fight. Wagner Prado was winning that fight. In the previous fight, Wagner Prado appeared very comfortable to stand and trade with Phil Davis, and it's understandable why. 7 of Prado's 8 pro wins have come by way of knockout, so Prado very, very comfortable and dangerous when the fight stays standing. Phil, you are a Div 1 All-American, a 4-time All-American wrestler. Use it. Do not be tempted to stand and bang with Wagner Prado, because if you stand and bang with Wagner Prado, you're gonna go out. And he was starting to display that in the first fight. Wagner Prado was handling Phil Davis, I don't want to say easily, but he was really handling Phil Davis in the stand-up. Davis, the key to this fight for Phil Davis, use his wrestling, get Prado on the ground, and hurt him. Put hands on him on the ground, smother him, keep him at bay. That's got to be Phil Davis's game plan to win this fight. I picked Phil Davis in the previous fight, I believe. you know what? I got to go with him again. I got to imagine that at this level, Phil Davis is not going to make the same mistake twice. He's going to go in there. He's going to relentlessly push for a takedown to keep Prado up against the cage and down on the mat and really put hands on him. So I got to go with Phil Davis to win this fight by way of technical knockout in the second round. To the welterweight division, we have John Fitch, one of the great welterweight gatekeepers, taking on Eric Silva. It's no surprise to anybody, I do not like John Fitch. I am not a John Fitch fan. Never have been, likely never will be. I just don't like the way the guy fights. Eric Silva, 14-2-1 on his pro career. He is 2-1 in the UFC, submitting Charlie Brenneman in his last fight. Eric Silva has a bit of a shady sort of fight history. He was disqualified against Carlo Prater for shots to the back of the head, I believe, and he was also issued a no contest for an illegal knee to a downed opponent against somebody in jungle fights. So, I mean, for a guy that's only got 17 pro fights, it's like there's 2 fights. It's almost a Czech Congo sort of. I mean, it's not a low blow every fight or anything, Czech. But 11 of his 14 pro wins have come by a finish. Eric Silva is a dangerous fighter. He absolutely is. He's an up-and-comer in this division, and the majority of the people who are making picks are on Eric Silva to win this fight. John Fitch, 23-4-1-1 on his pro career, 13-2-1 in the UFC. He was knocked out in impressive fashion by Johnny Hendricks in his last fight. The book is out on John Fitch. No finishes since 2007. He's injury prone. You know the game plan he has going in is to take his opponent down and basically dry hump him for 3 rounds. Ultimately, this is what it comes down to for me. John Fitch is 34 years old, and he's been fighting for a decade. He's been fighting since 2002 when he made his professional debut. If John Fitch is going to ever do anything again in MMA, his window is closing. If John Fitch is going to make a push to maybe even get another welterweight title fight, which again, I'm not advocating because John Fitch doesn't have anything for GSP, he cannot lose this fight. Again, he was knocked out by Johnny Hendricks in his previous fight. Before that was the majority draw, I believe it was a majority draw against BJ Penn. Fitch, who for a long time looked virtually untouchable unless he stepped to GSP, is starting to show some chinks in the armor. If he's ever going to do anything again, he has to beat Eric Silva. I have this history that I love to bet with people whose backs are against the wall. Because quite frankly, if John Fitch loses this fight to Eric Silva, it might be time to either seek out a new weight class or retire. I'm going to go with John Fitch here. I don't like to because I don't like John Fitch, and I really like Eric Silva, and I think Silva is one of these guys that's going to be the future of this division. But in terms of this fight, the future's not here quite yet. I'm going to go with John Fitch, 3-round unanimous judges dry humping decision. Up to the light heavyweight division, we have Glover Teixeira taking on Fabio Maldonado. Glover Teixeira, 18-2 on his pro career, won his UFC debut, currently riding a 16-fight win streak. That is Anderson Silva level of win streak. Not Anderson Silva level of opponent, but Anderson Silva level of just simply by the numbers win streak. In those 16 fights, 10 knockouts, 5 submissions, only 1 fight that did he win by decision. That is the only one of those 16 fights that went into the 3rd round. Glover Teixeira is a destroyer of worlds. Tommy Toehold used that phrase, and that it absolutely is a perfect way to describe Glover Teixeira. Fabio Maldonado, 18-5 on his pro career. He is 1-2 in the UFC, currently riding a two-fight losing streak to Igor Pokrajic and Kyle Kingsbury. Those losses snapped an 11-fight win streak for Maldonado. Maldonado is legit. Maldonado is a dangerous striker. Combined between MMA and boxing, 33 knockouts. Very impressive numbers. Very dangerous striker. Glover Teixeira is a destroyer of worlds. Glover Teixeira, 2nd round knockout or TKO over Fabio Maldonado. Co-main event, heavyweight division, Antonio Rodrigo Minotauro Nogueira making his return to the octagon, yes, taking on Dave Herman. Nogueira 33-7-1-1 on his pro career, an absolute pride, legend, and warrior. 4-3 in the UFC. Was, of course, submitted in his last fight by Frank Mir. Again, yeah, coming off the broken arm in the Mir fight. He's only 3-3 since 2008, so he's been kind of hit and miss as he's moving towards the latter part of his career. Big Nog is, I believe, 37 years old. So, I mean, he's definitely pushing it. And in those 6 fights, or sorry, actually in the UFC altogether, he only has 1 submission win. So, I mean, for a guy that's obviously Nogueira, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu all day, he's only got 1 submission at this level. Dave Herman, 21-4 on his pro career, has a 1-2 record in the UFC, riding a 2 knockout losing streak against, you know, top 10 caliber opponent, Roy Nelson and Stefan Struve in this division. 15 of his 21 pro wins have come by way of knockout. However, he's been knocked out in 3 of his 4 losses. Where Dave Herman is really susceptible, and at least to me anyways, is in the stand-up. Like we said, 3 of his 4 career losses have come by way of knockout. Not saying Dave Herman doesn't have good stand-up, because obviously he does. 15 of his 21 pro wins being by way of knockout. So he is a dangerous striker, but it also seems to me that that's sort of where he's susceptible to. And I worry about how Big Nog has recovered from this arm injury, because he didn't have surgery on it. He just rehabbed it. You're not as regenerative at 37 years old as you are at 27 years old, or even at 30. So, I mean, how well has that sort of recouped, you know what I mean? The arm that was broken is his power arm, is his right. I mean, there's all kinds of things in this fight going against Big Nog. That being said, if Big Nog gets Herman to the ground, he can submit him. That being said, Big Nog, and I got this from Scotty. Scotty, thank you very much for this information. Big Nog's only on about 33% of his takedowns. So, I mean, if he can get Herman to the ground, I'm just going to adjust there. If he can get Herman to the ground is a big question. I'm not 100% confident that he can. I have to take the smart money here, and I have to take Dave Herman. I think Dave Herman has the opportunity to be top 10 in this division. He's a very good fighter. So, you know, I don't like to, because my pride, no pun intended, really wants me to take Big Nog, but unfortunately I can't do that in this fight. Dave Herman by knockout or technical knockout inside the 3rd round. That takes us to our main event of the evening. Anderson the Spider Silva moving back up to light heavyweight, where he is unbeaten at 2-0, taking on the American Psycho Stephan Bonnar. Anderson Silva and Stephan Bonnar stepping in to quote-unquote save this card after the injury to Jose Aldo. Anderson Silva 32-4 on his pro career, undefeated 15-0 in the UFC. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, arguably the greatest fighter of all time. Currently riding a 16-fight win streak. He's got 3 straight knockouts. If Anderson Silva not only beats Stephan Bonnar but finishes him, not only does he become the first guy in Stephan Bonnar's career to legit finish him, and we'll talk about that in a second, but he will gain the UFC record for the most finishes in the UFC and the most wins in the UFC. So, I mean, Anderson's got all-time UFC records on the line here, not to mention the fact that he wants to be the first guy, I can only imagine, wants to be the first guy to legit finish Stephan Bonnar. We'll talk a little bit about him here. Stephan Bonnar, 14-7 on his pro career, 8-6 in the UFC, so he's got a winning record. 3-fight win streak, Kyle Kingsbury, Igor Pokrajic, and Krzysztof Shoshinsky. Stephan Bonnar, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, black belt in Taekwondo, black belt in Kerpa Karate. And again, Stephan Bonnar, if you look at Stephan Bonnar's MMA record, he's got 5 decision losses, 2 losses that have technically counted as technical knockouts. Both of those technically counted as knockout losses, but they were fights that were stopped due to cuts. So yes, technically they count as knockout losses, but I mean, Bonnar wasn't quote-unquote knocked out, so he still can sort of hold the distinction of, yeah, I've never been finished. Every fight that Bonnar is in, somebody gets bloody. Usually both of them get bloody, And then Bonnar just goes to this other level where he just becomes so much more aggressive. That being said, Stephan Bonnar simply does not have the track record or the skill set to beat Anderson Silva. You have to get into some relatively deep scenarios to find the proper scenario where Stephan Bonnar wins this fight. If Stephan Bonnar wants to win this fight, he's got to press the action on Silva. He's got to press him against the cage, got to clinch up with him. He's got to worry big time about Anderson Silva's clinch striking, so he needs to avoid Anderson's clinch striking. He needs to get in close. He needs to take the fight to the ground. He needs to avoid Silva's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is fantastic. And he needs to lay hands on Silva and hurt Silva. The only guy that's been able to put Silva in recent memory on his back and hurt him was Chael Sonnen with a 16-to-1 testosterone ratio, and where Silva allegedly anyways had a broken rib or something like that. I just don't see Stephan Bonnar following that specific tiny little path that he needs to take in order to beat Anderson Silva. I just don't see Bonnar winning this fight. I want to go with it because it is the Rocky story. It is, you know, everything that you would want an upset to be. It's even Bonnar saying, like, you think I'm going to be upset if I beat Anderson Silva and don't get a belt? No, I just beat Anderson Silva. He's got such a mind for the fight business, and he's humble and he's balanced, and even though his name is the American Psycho, you can say he's a balanced dude. And it's such an awesome story if Stephan Bonnar wins the fight. Stephan Bonnar's not going to win the fight. I would be the first guy to jump out of my seat if Stephan Bonnar beats or even finishes Anderson Silva. That would just completely blow my mind. But it's not going to happen. This fight, based on the fact that it's a fight on short notice, yes, it is the main event fight, but it is only 3 rounds. That was confirmed by Dana White. It is only going to be a 3-round fight. I'm taking Anderson Silva to beat Stephan Bonnar by unanimous decision. I'm going to give Bonnar that much. Anderson Silva's not going to finish him. Bonnar will be able to say, I broke the knockout streak for Anderson Silva. Silva's not going to finish Bonnar, but he is going to beat him. Unanimous decision at the end of 3 rounds for Anderson Silva. Those are my fight picks. I'll go over them here with you one more time. On the prelim card, lightweight, I have Cristiano Marcelo submitting Hezem Haddadi in the first round. Middleweight, I have Chris Camozzi decisioning Louise Kane. Welterweight, I have Sergio Moraes submitting Rene Forte in the second round. Featherweight, I have Diego Brandao TKOing Joey Gambino in the second round. Lightweight, I have Gleison Tibau decisioning Francisco Trinaldo. And the final fight on the prelim card at featherweight, I have Ronnie Mariano Becerra TKOing Sam Sicilia in the third round. Going to the main card, welterweight, Damian Maia with a decision victory over Rick Story. Light heavyweight, I have Phil Davis TKOing Wagner Prado in the second round. At welterweight, I have John Fitch decisioning Eric Silva. At light heavyweight, I have the Destroyer of Worlds, Glover Teixeira, TKOing or knocking out Fabio Maldonado in the second round. Co-main event, heavyweight, I have Dave Herman TKOing Big Nog Antonio Rodrigo Minotauro Nogueira in the third round. And main event of the evening, light heavyweight, I have Anderson Silva with a decision victory over Stephan Bonnar. Those are my fight picks. Want to see your fight picks in the comments in the section below. Did really good on the previous card. Can't wait to hit you with the next one. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and I'm out.